You are experiencing the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast.
It is August 12th, 2024, and welcome to the Knuckleheads of Liberty, where we are bringing you the people and the organizations fighting for liberty around the country and in your region. Today, we have a special guest with us. We have Thomas Sheedy, president of Atheists for Liberty. So we'll be talking to him about his movement and sort of their role in the liberty movement. But before we get to that, let me introduce you to the panel. In our upper left-hand corner, we have Leon the Word Brathwaite, last word in liberty. He is a retired engineer in the state of California. In our upper right-hand corner, we have Thomas Sheedy, and my name's Jason McPhee, and I'll be your host today. I wanted to hit a couple of announcements before we dive into the show. So we've been telling you about the Constitution group. Maybe, Leon, you could bring that up real quick. So that's the local study group on the Constitution. They are meeting at Epic Bible College. It's funny we're talking about that on the Atheists for Liberty show. But they are meeting at Epic Bible College on Thursday night, so you can go check that out. They'll be talking, I'm not quite sure what the subject will be, but looks like it's maybe women in voting. So they're going to be talking about that. And then I also wanted to remind everybody on September 15th, there's going to be a Constitution Day celebration in Folsom. So go check that out if you're local to Sacramento as well. And so then this brings us to our Liberty. Oh, by the way, I wanted to also let people know too, we're still working on the edits to our Freedom Fest show. We also interviewed Thomas in that too, so that'll be appearing soon. So hopefully we'll have that up in about a week or so. Let me introduce you now to our Liberty quote of the day. We always start with a quote on liberty, and this time our quote is going to be from Galileo Galilei, and in that he actually says, in the sciences, the authority of thousands of opinions is not worth as much as one tiny spark of reason in an individual man. So I kind of thought that was an interesting quote and maybe a little bit related to what some of the stuff we'll be talking about today. So I thought that was kind of cool. What do you guys think about this quote from the man who, I guess, challenged the dogma of a world?
Gotta say, I might have our team come in and steal that. Good. That would be such a great graphic already. And I love that quote, as is already.
Okay, Leon, any thoughts?
Well, it's kind of this science by consensus. It's we've seen too much of that these days, because the whole environmental movement is based upon these 97% of scientists who said we're going to hell in a handbasket. That is science by consensus. Then we had during the COVID lockdowns, it was science by consensus, and anybody who had a different perspective were locked out, shut down, all the sort of things, and the whole COVID narrative was based on science by consensus until Fauci told us he was the science. I don't know how he got that title. That was very interesting. But this whole science by consensus is really a dangerous thing, because you can almost set up a whole line narrative and get the whole society to go along with the damn nonsense, and we end up with sort of policies that are going to influence our lives, which take us in some horrible direction, as happened in COVID. So I think Galileo is very much correct, because I'm sure Isaac Newton, when he was involved in calculus, didn't go out and ask everybody what they thought about it. Or when Einstein came up with the theory of relativity, he didn't go out and ask everybody what he thought about it. He published his information. And the whole point about information becoming knowledge is that it must be able to withstand scrutiny. And this science by consensus is a bunch of damn nonsense which does not meet that criteria. So this is a very great quote, and I think more people should know about it.
And Leon, just to give a tiny correction, Newton, who followed him, was the guy who gets a lot of the credit for calculus. I just wanted to throw that in there.
What did I say?
You said he invented calculus too, and I think I was just after him.
I think I said Isaac Newton. Did I say?
You brought Isaac Newton in too. Okay, I didn't catch that. Sorry about that.
Okay.
I thought you were still talking about Galileo.
Oh no.
Okay.
All right. Okay.
Cool deal. Well, hey, we're doing this by consensus. Like, well, let's get to the meat of the show here. So we have Thomas Sheedy here, and he is going to tell us about Atheists for Liberty. And maybe Jane or maybe Leon, you could bring up the visual real quick here. So I wanted to show the web pages as we get going. So you can find it at atheistsforliberty.org. There is a link tree that you can find a lot of the links to there as well. And there's also a YouTube page and I actually watched a few of the videos, and they're pretty good videos. So I definitely encourage you to go check some of those out. But we do have a quick video too of Thomas talking about the organization. And so I think that now's a good time to bring that in. Leon, did you want to bring in KOL number 1?
Hi, I'm Thomas Sheedy, president of Atheists for Liberty. You know, sometimes we atheists get a bad reputation. We're told that in order to be a good person, one must be a religious person, a God-fearing person. Well, we have hundreds of members here at Atheists for Liberty who disagree. Patriotic people around the country who hold ethical and moral principles. We have 4 values here in our organization. We want to normalize atheism, safeguard secularism, preserve free thinking, and advance individual liberty. If you're interested in booking myself or anybody else on the Atheists for Liberty team for media inquiries, you can reach out at atheistsforliberty.org/media.
So, Thomas, how did you guys get going with this group? It certainly sounds like a group that's definitely needed in the Liberty community. So tell us a little bit about it and how you got started with it.
Thomas,
hello. Uh-oh. I think maybe Thomas is frozen out.
Is he frozen?
I'm not sure. We may be having technical difficulty. Oh,
yeah.
Thomas,
So I put a little message here in the private chat for you guys to see. It might have just finally loaded, but I just want to warn you, I lost internet just now twice. This did not happen for me during any other portion of the evening. I was on a whole other Liberty show even earlier too, but hopefully this does not continue, but I just want to let you guys know about that. I'm very sorry about that. Probably looks like a weird frozen robot.
Well, we just came out of the video, and I asked you a question. And
hopefully, I said something interesting, but feel free to still ask.
Yeah, we thought you were just having deep contemplation. But yeah, the question was, how did you guys get going with this organization? Because it certainly sounds like one that's definitely needed in the Liberty movement.
Yeah, we broke out of the new atheist movement, a variety of other think tanks and organizations that strictly wanted to normalize atheism and push for secularism in the United States. We were comprised of a lot of different people in this old movement. This was kind of like liberty counterculture of its day. Atheism was like really the thing in like the late 2000s, early 2010s on the internet. And the problem is that what we now know today as wokeism or far leftism or social justice or whatever you want to call it, infiltrated a lot of our think tanks that existed in the U.S. And so myself and other existing orgs,
oh boy,
activism and liberty-minded activism without the political and ideological litmus test.
Okay. Yeah, you started freezing up there a little bit, and hopefully this isn't a sign from above.
Yeah, no. This is, you know what sign this is? This is just a sign that we need to get a better Wi-Fi extender and router here. If anything, this is making me want to punch a hole in the wall with the system we got up here. So hopefully it doesn't continue, but yeah, but that's how Atheists for Liberty was created. We came out of a lot of other atheist organizations that weren't doing actual atheism. They were doing progressivism. They were doing social justice work. And it's great if you want to support a social justice organization or a progressive organization. But I joined the atheist movement to advance atheism and secularism, not progressivism. And so Atheists for Liberty was created as a result of that.
What,
sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Leon. Go. Well, I was going to ask you. Go ahead, Leon. This is a day of cross signals.
Yes, cross signals. So, Thomas, I'm trying to understand the nexus between this atheism and liberty. I mean, are you saying that that it is necessary to believe in the concept of liberty to be an atheist, or are you saying you must believe in atheism to be a libertarian, or what? I'm not sure. I'm not seeing the nexus.
Yeah, so neither. Hopefully to answer your question. So unfortunately, there are atheists out there that are very dogmatic. I would argue that that's not the majority of atheists. It's a vocal minority, but there are plenty of atheists who unfortunately do not care about liberty. They're authoritarians of all types, atheists who believe in all types of dogmas. And vice versa, there are libertarians, right? Even though Atheists for Liberty, we're an atheist organization, but we care about cognitive liberty. That's how we're able to really get into the liberty movement and market in the liberty movement. And we're also bipartisan. But there are plenty, as you guys know, you were at Freedom Fest, guys, libertarians who are all different kinds of strides and religious backgrounds. So there are atheists who are libertarians, Christians who are libertarians, Jews and Muslims who are libertarians. But when we're at Freedom Fest, we try to make the claim that you can be an advocate for liberty. You can care about the Constitution and the First Amendment and be involved in either libertarian politics, the liberty movement, or other organizations or whatever, and not believe in God. And that's totally fine. In fact, that's a great thing.
Yeah.
So do you see? Okay, the founders made a lot of allusions to about our rights coming from the Almighty. They said that in several places, even the Declaration of Independence, speaks about our unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which comes from our divine Creator. So, do you see that as a contradiction of liberty, or how do you view that?
I don't view most of it as a contradiction at all, because actually, if you look in most of the founding documents that we had, there aren't references to God in too many of them. We made a reference in the Declaration of Independence to a creator, but we created at the time when we were trying to unite Maryland farmers with Massachusetts traders and Southern plantation owners together against the biggest empire that the world has ever seen at that moment in time. All while simultaneously being very, very, at that time, weird when it comes to forming our system of government, looking to ancient Roman texts and ways the Greeks governed themselves. A bunch of nerds essentially going through ways to how society functioned thousands of years before the medieval kingdoms of Europe in order to create a functioning society. So I think they thought ahead for their time. The founders were a mix of various different people, right? You had Christians, you had some very, very devoutly religious founders like John Adams, but also you had a lot of deists like Thomas Jefferson and even one atheist, Thomas Paine, who were all together trying to figure out in a crowded room in Philadelphia how to create this new republic that existed. So if you look at actually plenty of the documents that existed at the time, there's no reference to God or religion in the Constitution. We have this document called the Treaty of Tripoli. Speaking of John Adams, the most Christian and religious founding father, saying in 1799 that the government in the United States is not in any way founded on the Christian religion. Obviously, that doesn't equate to what you were asking about God, but it's usually a similar argument that I've had to address from people of the Christian faith, but also other faiths that try to bring that topic into conversation. That's why I'm only mentioning it there. Definitely there was a reference to a creator in the Declaration, but with Thomas Jefferson trying to tear apart the Bible to make it sound sane and rational, to Thomas Paine, Thomas Jefferson trying to tear apart the Bible, to Thomas Paine, writing various different kinds of Enlightenment type wordings and common sense. We were a secular country founded in a time where that was not seen at all in the history of the world. And unfortunately, hundreds of years later, we have to go and defend their intentions years and years later from people that try to use certain talking points for political gain. Not saying that's you in any way, but others who I've had to use that argument to reply to. That's my stance on it.
It almost sounds like this was a 2/3 compromise between the secularists and the religious people.
Exactly. We did a ton of compromising, right? Look at the North and the South and the topic of slavery, for instance, all these Northern founders wanted slavery to be abolished instantly, but we came to a compromise with the South. Okay, we're going to abolish slavery by the year 1808, but wait a second. You're going to tear apart the country if we end slavery too long. Okay, we're going to compromise for like another 50 years. It was a lot of like having these weird groups of intellectuals, but also people of different cultures together. And we approved of some very odd things, some odd things that were great, but some odd things that were also not great at all, just to keep this fledgling republic together. And that's pretty much the history of the United States, a ragtag band of rebels, good ones and bad ones, that made compromises for good and for worse.
But you know, our money says, "In God we trust," right?
Yeah, but that was added to coins in the 1860s and to paper money in the 1950s when we were just trying to be different than the Soviet Union, which had state atheism, which I'm totally against. State-mandated anti-religion or non-religion, you could say.
And I will say this, on the first coin, the first penny was minted by Ben Franklin. And on that, it didn't say anything about God. It said, "Mind your business." That's literally what he said.
Yeah.
And I think there might have been something about unity on the other side. There was 13 rings on it. So that was one thing that they really wanted, is they didn't want people worshiping the leaders or necessarily having, I think I'm not sure all of the issues with religion, but they definitely didn't want people worshiping their leaders. I know that, because they didn't have any images of people on the coins either.
Yeah, but this raises some interesting questions, I think, though, because I think, I'm not trying to be controversial here, but I think it's safe to say that we here in the United States, our values are based on Western civilization, which are based on Judeo-Christian values. So does that give you pause in terms of your whole movement of atheism and liberty?
It doesn't primarily, because I would make the argument that a lot of our values are Enlightenment-based values that came from the 18th century and 17th, 18th, and 19th century thinkers, primarily in Europe, but also in the Americas, who pushed for the idea of the individual above eternal kings, collectives, things like that. I think the idea Judeo-Christian, that popped up in around the 1970s and 1980s, when the moral majority was trying to enter power in U.S. politics during the Carter presidency and into the Reagan presidency. Judeo and Christian were kind of married as a term in the conservative movement, the modern day conservative movement of William F. Buckley. But before that, you didn't even see the term kind of used. The term Christian nation was used beforehand in politics. But even then, this idea of this kind of Christendom that's married to politics, it really only started to really gain relevance in the latter 20th century. Beforehand, it was very, very foreign of an idea for religion or any sect of religion to be linked. I'll give you a great instance. 1960, the presidential election between Kennedy and Nixon. You had a lot of Americans dogmatically oppose John F. Kennedy because of his Roman Catholicism, saying that, if we elect Kennedy, we're going to be taking orders from the Pope. That's kind of that rebellious, like secular, really in our blood, in our nature, even amongst Christians, amongst Jews, amongst Muslims, amongst Hindus, nature that we as Americans kind of always had, but we're trying to pat it under the rug because it's not convenient for us to say that anymore in politics. But here's where I'll also give credence and I'll give credit, because I feel like I'm like you're bringing something up and I'm like pounding it down as an idea, and I really don't want to be that way. There are plenty of these Enlightenment thinkers as well that identified as Christian. There are plenty of these Enlightenment thinkers as well who grew up in a Europe that, I'll give a bone to Christianity here, I guess, had a history of Christianity governing Europe for over 1,000 years prior. But I would argue that the values that make the United States what they are today, also when we established them in the founding, they're based off the Enlightenment. They're based off this experiment that we're not going to have any gods or any deities govern us. We're going to have this idea of individual rights govern us. And that's what made us, and it's not even an atheist thing, by the way, that's what made America so beautiful. That's what that's what makes everybody at say Freedom Fest come together so much to share ideas and new innovations. This absolute love, and some people at Freedom Fest go really all in on that love for our country and this kind of individual values enlightenment mindset and values that make us who we are.
So I don't want to belabor the point, but
please.
you do not,
I'm fine with controversy, by the way. So I don't feel like you're treating me a certain way. I really appreciate you bringing up what you want to bring to, and this is your show.
The whole concept of individual rights, which is I think is foundational to our existence as a nation. You don't think that came out of Judeo-Christian values?
No, I don't. In fact, actually, you had plenty of the Christian churches of their day in the 18th century push back against any advocacy for individual rights. So like France, if you look at France, they had this kind of absolute monarchy that existed up until the French Revolution, where these kings, they were chosen by God to lead. And you can argue, you can kind of see why the French ended up getting annoyed for a bit, because if you can say God just made me do this or God just made me do that, it justifies anything you want to do, good or bad. The same with the British in some ways, although they were better. They had kind of not constitutionalism. They kind of, what did they have? They had a constitutional monarchy, but even then, they made this argument that it was God that kind of chose them to it's God that mandates the king to go through Parliament to enact barbaric acts of authority onto its peoples. It's something that I think we, as Americans or American colonists, later on became Americans, got very tired of seeing. And I think this is why the founders really wanted to go and look at societies pre-medieval Christian Europe to figure out what makes the country so good in its regards. I'll also, by the way, for people who want an intellectual analysis on some of these talking points and the kind of back and forth, Michael Knowles and Alex O'Connor had a very, very good discussion from a few months ago that's on YouTube now, where kind of this very rich back and forth on some of these talking points is made. And I highly advise people to go check that out as well. But it's like Michael Knowles bringing something up very, very well, because he's just so used to hearing and saying it in American conservatism. Maybe you can even argue parts of libertarianism. And then Alex O'Connor, this YouTube atheist kid who's a year younger than me, jumping on back and kind of doing the owning with facts and logic kind of move. But it's very interesting, and I always like it when I get to communicate the real views of the founders to more and more people, especially those who love liberty.
Well, this brings up a question I like to ask all of our guests, and certainly you've had, an evolution of discovery into both, I guess, secular atheism, and libertarian values, or liberty values, I guess you might say. Which preceded which, I guess, and what was it that rang your liberty bell that sort of awoken you to I guess, because, a lot of us, we go through public schools and we're kind of taught that, hey, look, we should solve a lot of our problems with government. But clearly you're got something that's a little bit different here with Push for Liberty. So I just curious what your evolution was on some of this stuff.
So to answer your first question, I think in general, not for me, but society-wise, I think liberty-minded values came or precede secular values, and a lot of people have very different terms for secular values. I'll just call them Enlightenment values, and we can chuck liberty in there as well, include that in. For me, my journey is very interesting. So I used to be a Christian, Roman Catholic. I was raised Catholic for 15 years. I was really questioning my faith a lot in the late 2000s into the early 2010s. This is when same-sex marriage was being debated on secular grounds, not just religious grounds, but secular grounds as well. And while my mother was actually part of the moral majority, so that 1970s, 1980s Christendom that was rising in politics, my mother was very avid in support of those kind of policies when she was around my age. And so I kind of had that upbringing where I saw that ardent religiosity in the household, but I was raised in a very secular environment at the same time. So I went to public school. I kind of was a milquetoast Catholic, even though my mother was a little bit different than me, very different than me. But I always knew of this idea, this mindset of church-state separation. There's school where you learn factual, rational things that can't be debated theologically, that no matter if you're a Christian, Jew, Muslim, atheist, Hindu, you're going to be taught the same stuff, same objective, real stuff. And then there's church, where I went to the parish center to get my lessons for confirmation and to learn about different tenets of Catholicism and Christianity. That mindset was already in there. And when I was starting to pay attention to news and the debate among things like gay marriage and also religion in public settings and in government, I found it to be interesting that a medieval religious institution like the church was getting into secular territory when it came to two consenting adults doing what they could in a secular setting, by the way, not in the halls of a church. I'm very much in favor of religious liberty and the freedom of religious institutions to do and decide on what they will. So I was already this kind of big skeptic, this troublemaker, questioning Catholicism, but the more I saw how people didn't take Catholicism seriously, I also respected ardent Catholics even more, because at least they believed what they were preaching. And it all came boiling up to this moment after several months after my confirmation, after I saw even more hypocrisy, in my view, within the church. In around 2013, I was 15 years old. I was watching Bill Maher give an old clip of one of his 2005 comedy specials. Mercury and a bunch of other poisons used to be in our vaccines and in our medicines. And he said later on we discovered, Leon, talking about issues with science and with freedom and the science at the time, right? We ended up discovering that mercury was a poison that was in some of our vaccines. And Bill Maher said that later on in life, he got that stuff drilled out of him. And he said, and you can do the same thing with Catholicism. And at that exact moment in May of 2013, when I was a ninth grader studying for my Regents exams, I became an atheist on the spot. And I remember the exact moment when that happened. And so that's how kind of my secular bells rang. I instantly dove into the new atheist movement. I became president of Long Island Atheists when I was in high school. I nearly sued my school district to get an atheist club established, and I got a scholarship. I got flown out. And this is when all my time in politics really kind of started, nearly a decade ago, or over a decade ago at this point. So I was president of Long Island Atheists after high school. I ran that for 2 years when I was in community college. And then I went to high school after this, university after this big event, 2 years after this big event known as the Reason Rally, the second Reason Rally. And I saw these social justice and leftist dogmas infiltrate a supposed nonpartisan, neutral atheist movement in the United States. And so I was getting very much into the atheist movement at that time. I was already assistant state director for New York at only like 18, 19 years old. I was already in many of these positions. And I saw that the so-called rich, enlightening atheist movement, they didn't reach out to libertarians as much. They didn't reach out to conservatives as much. Talk about trying to make atheism nonpartisan, right, amongst all people in politics and in the halls of Congress and all these places. But only for progressives. That's interesting.
Let me just jump in real quick, too. If you're watching us on public access, our time is up, but you can catch the rest of this conversation online. So come check it out. We're going to talk about this, the 10 Commandments in the schools, and maybe a few other things, too. So come check us out there. So back to you, Thomas.
Yeah, guys, please go ahead and watch further. I automatically was starting to see this kind of social justice, this new kind of religion and religious type dogmatic belief system corrupt these atheist institutions, these secular, so-called skeptic, free-thinking, rational institutions. People start to get kicked out of conferences, false allegations, people's careers being ruined, us allowing people with severe mental disorders who didn't get treated in private or therapy or with medication onto boards. We tolerated cartoonish style unprofessionalism and insanity, add on to the total partisanship that led to the ultimate destruction of the kind of bipartisan new atheist counterculture that once existed in the United States. So that's when my liberty bells started to ring. I started to realize, wait a second, if we really care about being rational and being better than the religious and being more free thinking, why is it that some of our fellow atheists are acting extremely religious, some of them even defending the worst parts of Islamic terror and radical Islam and jihad and Islamism in the name of diversity? This is not stuff that actually helps us advance secular values or rationality. This is stuff that puts us back into the dark ages and infringes on people's freedom of speech. And so that's when my liberty bells rang. And so I got together with a bunch of other heterodox thinkers from these other atheist organizations who secretly felt like they couldn't really speak their minds. And I founded, along with a co-founder of mine, Michael, we founded Atheists for Liberty, a 501c3 nonprofit that truly stands for free speech, free thinking, and freedom for all. So hopefully that long rant answers your question.
No, it wasn't a long rant. It was a good one. So do you believe that faith or belief in a divine creator is somewhat irrational?
I do. Yeah, I would say so.
Okay.
But again, very, when I'm at a place like Freedom Fest, right, and we are talking about issues that plague all of us, right? I'm not going to be silent about my atheism. I think actually a lot of anti-woke atheists made the mistake from 2020 to 2023, 2024 about like muting their atheism or neutering their atheism a little bit because they don't want to come off as offensive. But meanwhile, Christians never had to do that. I think we should have been honest about our views of religion, but we should have been honest too about our interest in enlarging the tent. If we care about liberty, we got to have interfaith coalitions. So there are times where we should be absolutely honest about our views on belief in God and religion and stuff like that. I'm not going to hide my views on religion, but simultaneously, if people's freedoms of speech or freedoms of religion or from religion are under attack, I'm going to team up with Christians who simultaneously care about the First Amendment. We're going to team up with Jews and Muslims who care about the First Amendment. We were at Freedom Fest, for instance, helping this atheist of Indian descent. He was part of a massive lawsuit against the California Civil Rights Department because they were discriminating against him as an atheist. And who's helping him? Who are the people that now I, as president of Atheists for Liberty, have to get in contact with to work together with? The heads of the Hindu American Foundation. So I want to make that very clear. Yes, I'm not going to lie. I'm not, someone's, I don't want anybody to crop this out in a few years and say, aha, Thomas is now crapping on religion. He wasn't crapping on religion a few years ago. No. I am honest, like totally honest with where I stand. But I have a religious family. I have religious friends. I have religious colleagues. There are times to be honest about your views, and there are times to also agree to disagree and build coalitions to save our country and to save freedom of speech. So I'm being a little politically incorrect, but to add in those little things, because I don't want to sound like too mean and too dogmatic about it either, if that makes sense.
Well, Thomas, I did want to echo into your story too about how you came into all this, because I had kind of a similar experience, not completely the same route to liberty, but I used to be part of a skeptics movement here in Sacramento, and so there's a huge overlap with the atheist community in that. And that was the experience I had, is that I started with these guys maybe 15 years ago or so, and I watched as it morphed into something where suddenly they were against free speech, and they started supporting things like hate speech and all this. And I thought, my gosh, of anybody who should be open to the ideas of liberty and against any infringements in free speech, it should be atheists.
Look at Michael Shermer. Look what happened to poor Michael Shermer. He is one of the most famous skeptics of our time. He's also on the advisory board of Atheists for Liberty. Very, very active in California. I was actually at the Skeptic Society conference last December. A lot of pro Atheists for Liberty people there. Basically, an atheist conference. He got rooted out of the movement, where he is just a sane, normal skeptic that's just been preaching the same views he's always had. He said, you know what, I'm getting kicked out of some spaces. That's it. I'm bouncing. I'm done. And I think he's been more sane for it ever since. And he now speaks at Freedom Fest every year, rightly so. And this was disgusting to see. And I was just getting into this movement a lot when I was hitting 17, 18, 19 years old, resume in hand, pre-Atheists for Liberty days. And I saw this amazing counterculture that swept the world die, all because of this new religion. So I think it needs to be revived. All the data is showing that we're becoming more non-religious. That's not going away. So we need a vehicle to guide to guide that growth, that Pew data and that growth in the right direction as a country. And if these institutions that have existed for decades, like American Atheists, the American Humanist Association, and the Secular Student Alliance and others, if they're not going to do it because they care more about progressivism than atheism, And by the way, we have Democrats that are members, we have Republicans that are members, we have libertarians that are members of Atheists for Liberty. But if they're going to care about their own political view and their social justice stuff, compared to the original mission that made people support those organizations in the first place, yeah, we're going to grow. We're going to do the things that they used to do, and we're going to have pleasure doing it. Well, I don't like the fact that we're one of the only vehicles that is doing it, but if we have to, then so be it. And we're going to be the real skeptics in the room.
You know what kills me too is for so many of these people, their heroes are scientists. Great minds like Mr. Galileo that we talked about at the beginning of this show, and the fact that his story is one they love to bring up about him championing science by questioning dogma, by speaking out against it, and that's literally what they're trying to shut down. I mean, they assume they're right, so they think it's okay for them to shut down other people, but there just seems to be this odd socialist bent that is going through that community, like you said, kind of a religiosity in that community, so to speak. So, and
it's not the majority, but it's a vocal minority that took everything over. So every time we go to Freedom Fest, or every time we go to CPAC or LibertyCon, or even spaces that are not even right-leaning, our online stuff, we have plenty of liberals and Democrats, by the way, who come in. We do receptions around the country. So a lot of people that even are more left-wing than you guys, they come up to me and they said, oh my God, I used to be like an afterlife tier member of like the Freedom from Religion Foundation. I used to be a big donor, a big supporter, or state director at American Atheists. I used to run this secular student alliance group when I was in college or high school or whatever. They all come up to me and they said, like, you guys are doing the very atheist stuff that I signed up to want to do 5-10 years ago. It's like, where's that atheism? You guys are the only ones in the room that are still doing it. And it's very sad. These people, the people that now control that old movement, or what remains of it, a ghost of its former self, I usually say on shows, they're not bringing skepticism into the room. They're not. Yeah. They don't care. They won the war. So I tell people all the time, fine. I always say this: if Nick Fish of American Atheists, if Dan or Annie Laurie Gaylor of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, if Maggie of the Secular Coalition for America, or any of these other leaders, if any of them want to give me a call and actually reconcile and find things that we can work on, I'll be the first one to say yes. But I tell people this on every donor call, every show that I'm on at this point. Am I ever going to get those calls? I don't know. I'll exclude also CFI. CFI is fine. There's some good people in CFI, but pretty much when it comes to like the vast majority of this entire new atheist apparatus that was in the country, they attack Richard Dawkins now. Richard Dawkins, the most famous atheist biologist in the world, that helped make their movement super spectacular and big. Dawkins, I believe, just got banned on Facebook for having a simple view of biology that he always had. Had, and he's not a right winger. He's like a classical liberal Bill Maher leaning labor guy. Right. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if this is why I love Atheists for Liberty. We have all these normal atheists, right wing and liberal, in with us who care about sanity, who care about our main pillars. And that's how we're able to really rebuild what was lost here. We're actually going to be bipartisan. We're actually going to go to CPAC. We're actually going to go to Freedom Fest. We're actually going to show people that are in these spaces, you could be non-religious and that's okay. And we're actually going to support you. We're not saying stuff for political talking points. I'm fine with us losing donors. I'm fine with us gaining donors somewhere else. We're going to be true to our word, because this atheist movement was needed. It was needed for the world. It was needed for the country, and it's still needed now. So if American Atheists is not going to, pull in the heavy lifting, we're going to do just that. I don't even know what question I answered, but that I go on tangents sometimes, guys, and this is my problem. You got me on one.
Well, this is probably a good spot to segue into something I was going to bring up later in the show, but this seems to fit right in now. But we're talking about the religiosity of it's almost a secular religiosity that's popped up in some sense. And we've seen this with COVID. And Leon kind of alluded to that when we were talking about the quote from Mr. Galileo earlier in the show. But Leon, maybe you could bring up the visual. I mean, some of the stuff we saw was just absolutely nuts. During COVID, we had heard that, hey, look, to be safe, you've got to, it's all about the science, and you've got to separate, you've got to quarantine. And then suddenly they said, oh, unless it's about social justice, then you can get out there.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
right.
Oh my
Don't worry
God.
about the separate. But there was a little bit more. Let me just bring up a few things before we digress in the conversation. Here was a quote from Mr. Gorsuch too, who has a book out that's actually pretty good right now. But Gorsuch is saying here that churches were shut down while they allowed casinos to remain open. And so,
Right.
of course, they were
Crazy.
allowing marches. So, some of this stuff, it's almost like, how do you make these decisions?
Made no
And then,
sense.
of course, we saw, and then we saw Mr. Science himself, Tony Fauci, and he starts out at the beginning telling us that, hey, masks are something that you shouldn't be using. You shouldn't. This is something that is not going to help you. Then suddenly he came out and he said, well, you know what? I wasn't really telling you the truth then. And, you guys, you should be wearing masks. Then suddenly we found out double masking was the thing.
Right.
And eventually it got to the point where, he was saying that, well, you know what? Maybe they're not that effective but still, we're gonna ask you to wear them anyways. In fact, we even have a little video clip I wanted to show. And Leon, this is KOL 5. This is Mr. Fauci himself. And with all of this uncertainty, he's defending himself as the science, which is something you alluded to earlier. Maybe you could show this video clip real quickly on.
Supporters of this group
James?
say if there could be a Christmas tree here in the Capitol, then they can display this put on by the Iowa Satanic Temple.
We're going to really relish the opportunity to be represented in a public forum. We don't have a church on every street corner.
Lucian Greaves, co-founder of the Satanic Temple, says this satanic display is a symbol for their right of religious freedom. He says if you don't like it, don't look at it.
My feeling is that if people don't like our displays in public forums, they don't have to engage with them. They don't have to view them.
Okay, come on in.
Flockhart organized a prayer group on Wednesday around the Christmas tree.
Leon, that was the wrong clip. That was clip 6. Sorry.
Oh,
So anybody who spends lies and threatens and all that theater that goes on with some of the investigations and the congressional committees and the Rand Pauls and all that other nonsense, that's noise, Margaret. That's noise. I know what my job is. So if they want to, I mean, anybody who's looking at this carefully realizes that there's a distinct anti-science flavor to this. So if they get up and criticize science, nobody's going to know what they're talking about. But if they get up and really aim their bullets at Tony Fauci, well, people could recognize there's a person there, there's a face, there's a voice you can recognize, you see him on television. So it's easy to criticize. But they're really criticizing science because I represent science. That's dangerous. To me, that's more dangerous than the slings and the arrows that get thrown at me.
Oh
And
my
so
God.
that was the clip we meant to show.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about the
That's
other
where
along.
that's where my inner Republican actually comes on out. Like, oh my God. So do you know what's funny about Anthony Fauci? So this is what I was talking about, how religious the movement got. In 2021, speaking of Richard Dawkins, he got his 1996 Humanist of the Year award taken away. And who did they give the 2020, after taking away Dawkins' award, who did the American Humanist Association give the award to immediately after? Anthony Fauci. Anthony Fauci. So that's a hilarious part. I'll give them credit. He got an award previously in 2003, which I actually think was justified because Fauci was still a big figure in science saying he was an atheist and a humanist. So 2003 Fauci makes sense. 2021 politicized progressive Fauci. I don't think it's really fitting to take away Dawkins' award to really show you're this neutral, good without God humanist association and give it to Anthony Fauci. Totally not political at all. Totally not political. But that's the crap that, you know, well, that wasn't really a curse, but I don't know if I can. But like that's kind of what we had to deal with. The atheist community was kind of no more. It was just a progressive morph. But like what myself and the other Atheists for Liberty people were looking afar at and seeing, we actually wrote some statements about the matter. If anybody wants to go to atheistsforliberty.org and they can go to the statement section, we actually wrote a statement about Dawkins in this case. And we actually, I believe, made some tweets and posts about the whole controversy at the time. But it's kind of funny. And look, I'll say this. In science, it's always valid to be wrong. We always try to learn and be better. But isn't it interesting how it was a constant flip back, flip back, flip back, flip back? And if you dare speak out about it on social media platforms, you're done. Up until it didn't become inconvenient. So, I don't even like to get into much COVID politics because I find it to be boring. But whenever I do get into it, I unleash, in ranting about it with a roar because of how annoying I saw my life and society and the lives of my friends and family and everybody, just our economy, just go into a total collapse with this. And it's not a right-wing thing. Bill Maher's talked about it. Other people have talked about it as well. I think any sane individual at this point can agree that a lot of what happened during the COVID pandemic was a massive, massive mistake. A massive mistake. Yeah. And I'm pro-vaccine, actually. I'm very pro-scientific ingenuity. But definitely also with that vaccine, it was pushed out very, very quickly. It was very, very politicized. Normally, we have a better, more thorough review process before going out with vaccines. I actually am pro-vax, but not pro-weird, massively political in a weird social justice age kind of science-y kind of thing. I'm not in favor of that. That's not the science that I support.
Yeah. Authoritarian government. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say authoritarian government isn't really part of the scientific recipe.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And being pro-vax is fine. What I have my problem with during COVID was the mandates.
Yeah. I got to share. Yes. So, mind if I share this story? Because this is actually perfect. How we. I think one of you were mentioning this. How there are certain moderates and extremists on this issue during that time. So I was at a anti-vax mandate protest. I wasn't leading it. I was just visiting and seeing what it was all about. At Stony Brook University, there was a Turning Point USA National, along with a bunch of right-wing conservative type populist groups, were at the university protesting vaccine mandates. So there were three groups that I saw that were active. There were the right-wingers that were having this event, free speech on campus, to protest the mandates. I was anti-mandate at that time, still am, but at that time I was anti-mandate, but still pro-vaccine, pro-science. And there were a mix of people, I'll be honest. There were some people that were very much of the screw science kind of crowd. But there were also a good chunk of normal people that just didn't like the mandates and wanted freedom, people that were very much pro-science. There were the woke, I love how you brought up that article, there were the woke Democratic Socialists of America screaming and yelling racist, sexist, and a bunch of other things that had nothing to do with even the issue, by the way. This is what I'm talking about with the social justice stuff. It's not actually about science. It's not actually about stuff. It's about this kind of intersectional hierarchy. So it wasn't even about COVID science. And then you had a third group of liberal-leaning, pro-vaccine, and some even pro-vaccine mandate science college students. So there were three different gates. So one end you had the Democratic Socialists, the other end you had the right-wingers protesting vax mandates. In the middle, gated off by cops, were the apolitical but kind of left-leaning medical science students. I went up to that third group, the kind of just science students group, and they had a problem with a good chunk of the right-wing stuff that was being said. Fine, whatever. But I explained to them and said, hey, I'm a science advocate. I'm pro-science and pro-reason. I run an atheist organization. I'm not some typical religious right, kind of, anti-science, pro-Ken Ham kind of person, right-wing dude, whatever, being against the science. I was actually respectfully explaining how bad these mandates were, how crazy this stuff was pushed. And if you're an actual advocate for science, you should actually be opposed to this stuff. And I remember having that good dialogue with a lot of people. I won a few of them over, and a police officer who had to be impartial and neutral and just do his job, he came up to me shortly after and he said, I really appreciate what you said. Out of all the different groups of people, you sounded like the most rational person in this whole big debate of things, because he saw that I wasn't this I'm going to be a little mean, little stereotypical. I wasn't this religious hick, being darn the science, bad science. I wasn't this DSA person crying racism, sexism, Islamophobia, transphobia. I was trying to really show common ground with people and genuinely use epistemology to communicate. And I was able to win people over by actually being real about this stuff. And that's also what's so great about, I was telling some of the right-wing people this about my conversation. I said, this is what happens when you guys actually get rid of you have to be religious in order to stand up for liberty stereotype. If you show that you can have scientific minds and atheists and skeptics and free thinkers in your ranks too, and care about freedom of association and bodily autonomy and all this other stuff, free speech, you can win a lot of normal people over, a lot of normal middle of the road people over. And I won some hearts and minds on the right wing side too by doing that.
Yeah.
But yeah, this proves the point of the article, right? That you had the science advocates who were like they were kind of pro-mandate and pro-vax because they just didn't know better. And I'm pro-vax for those that are just jumping in now. But you had the social justice people that didn't even care. They just wanted to spew their nonsense, and they used this issue to spout it and to spread their religion around.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny too because you wind up with results like this, and or Leon, maybe you could bring up the visual real quick. Getting to all that mask nonsense, I love this particular meme because it shows at an airport here they're separating people in the top by 6 feet before you get onto a plane, and then they sit them all together once they get in the plane. It's just like, I mean, how that makes any sense, or the science at the time. But yeah, it's it's really interesting to see how it is that so many science-minded people wind up sort of falling onto that side of the argument. And you would think they would be the people who would be the most skeptical. And oddly, so many of them fell into line with whatever the administration was saying at the time. So,
Science. This was the science by consensus, you see. That virus had infected. We were not only dealing with the COVID virus, we was also dealing with the psychological virus of this science by consensus, and everybody was just either falling in line, and if you don't fall in line, you end up being, kicked out of the, shall we say, the normal society, because remember there was a time when they were talking about the people who are not vaccinated, or they are the worst set of people. Oh my goodness gracious, they cannot go to work, they should not be on the trains, they should not be anywhere in crowds, except for the social justice people, of course. And this is the kind of science by consensus that we were dealing with. So we were dealing with two viruses.
I think it's important to support science, but not embrace any kind of dogmatic scientism. Understand that science, there are certain issues I do think are pretty much set in stone, but when it comes to really everything, I think it is important to be a skeptic and be skeptical. I think science always changes. I think you should be supportive of science over myth and superstition. I think science, whatever science is now in 2024, is the best that we have at solving the questions of the universe and our lives and our brains and our biology, everything. Now, I think everybody should be advocates of science, but understand that we will always find better information tomorrow. So I actually don't think people should be anti-science. And I think there are some people on the right who saw what happened during COVID and said, oh, screw anything any scientist says about anything. I think we should not embrace that. I think we should use this as an example of American history and what happens when people don't question authority enough.
It's true. And this is what I said at the beginning. Information can only become knowledge if it can withstand scrutiny. And this is what science is all about, is that there's information out there. It must be able to withstand the scrutiny. If it withstands the scrutiny, then it can become knowledge that we could apply to our lives. But some of this damn nonsense is people trying to tell us we don't have to go through that step of withstanding the scrutiny. We don't have to go through that. Some authority could just mandate it, and then we should say, okay, thank you. You are God. Well, kind of ironic I'm saying that to you, right? But we are God, and here we go.
Well, we've been beating up on the authoritarian left quite a bit, but, there have been a few instances of the authoritarian right sort of popping their head up. And one recent thing that we saw that I figure it's a good topic for this discussion here is a push for the 10 Commandments in the schools. And that's in Louisiana. Sorry, Leon, maybe you could bring up
the... okay.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so here we have a recent article, and in Louisiana, they have recently passed a law that says the 10 Commandments must be displayed in the school. And so I know this is something that your organization has done a little bit of write-up and talking about. So here's the article from Atheists for Liberty on this. But I did think it would be worth us talking about it just a little bit. But we have a video clip that shows, I guess, the governor saying some of the reasons why he's doing it. And so I figured this will give a little bit of their side of it, and then maybe we could talk about it a little bit. So, James, maybe you can play KOL number 2. This is the Louisiana governor on Fox News explaining what it is they're trying to do there.
We just believe that displaying historical documents, especially something that is as important as the 10 Commandments. Look, when the Supreme Court meets, the doors of the Supreme Court on the backside have the 10 Commandments. Moses faces the U.S. Speaker of the House in the House chamber. He is the original giver of law. Most of our laws in this country are founded on the 10 Commandments. What's the big problem, Sandra? That's the part that I don't understand.
Now, there's a little bit of pushback that they give against him, too, on the thing. And that's, Jane, maybe you could play KOL 4. That shows the pushback that he gets where he's challenged a little bit on it.
If someone in those schools comes from a different religion or background and they want their rules, their covenant, they want those up on the wall, can a group come in and make the case for that?
Well, it would have to make that case to the legislature, and it would have to meet the criteria of the statute. You know, the interesting thing about the First Amendment, and I heard it in one of the comments that you played, is this separation of church and state. I challenge anyone who says that to go find me those words in the First Amendment. They don't exist. It's a metaphor that was breathed into the First Amendment by a liberal Supreme Court in the 1930s. And so, again, this nation, look at all of the documents, all of the founding documents of this nation were based upon Judeo-Christian principles. We've got it on our money. We've got it all over our Capitol. We have it in the Supreme Court. It is those that want to extract that out of the foundation of this country that really and truly want to create the chaos that ultimately is the demise of this nation.
So, Thomas, I figured that'll get you fired up.
Oh, my God. Yeah. Where to start? Governor Landry could not be more wrong about all this. He oh my God, I'm so sick of hearing the word separation of church and state were not in the Constitution. Yeah. It's from a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptists. Yes. But, okay, simultaneously, if the words free speech are not explicitly said in that exact combination in the Constitution, does that mean that we don't have free speech? No. But isn't it interesting how in the name of religion and this politically correct stupid game in the conservative movement, we have to somehow pretend that argument has any validation? It doesn't. The separation of church and state is this: Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That's our separation between church and state. And then they're going to say, well, Thomas, different states have their own state religions. Yes, they did. And Americans found a lot of that to be silly. And we had that in our culture, i.e. the Kennedy election, this big, harsh separation of church and state culture that's existed for a long time. And then we had something called the 14th Amendment that came in that made all the federal laws, guys, of the First Amendment and everything apply to the states. So this idea that was just a bunch of like commie radicals during the Roosevelt administration of the 30s that made the no. American secularism is in our blood. It's just politically correct for him to say that because the conservative movement since the 70s has been brought up to believe that talking point to appease megachurch donors. And so we have to pretend that statement has validity when it does not. That's my rant.
Well, I don't see how this will survive judicial scrutiny. I think obviously there's going to be litigation over that that requirement, and I don't think it will survive. I mean the guy does make a good point in terms of Governor Landry. I guess makes a good point that of course it's on our money and there have been statements in our founding documents about a divine creator and all that.
But that was added years later. So that was added. That was added in the 50s when we wanted to look like we weren't atheistic in any way or too secular in any way. So that was done just to politically appease people.
Well, it's true, but I mean the Declaration does talk about the creator, right?
Sure, a creator that has no reference to God, Jesus, anything of any particular faith, by a guy who specifically ripped the Bible out piece by piece, sentence by sentence, to try to be more rational in his 1760s, 1770s, 1780s way of thinking. He was the atheist of his day.
Thomas, I'm not arguing your point, okay? Honestly,
no, I know. You guys are right. You did get me on and fired up a little bit.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying there are references to a creator in the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
And whether
sure. I'll give them that.
On the money, even though it was added later on, there are references about in God we trust, on money. Okay, so I know Landry is trying to tie that into, well, the government have made these statements and all that kind of stuff, so it should be okay for him to have this thing, the Ten Commandments displayed in public schools. I just don't think that will survive judicial scrutiny.
I don't think so. Even if right now we have a Supreme Court that is stacked a certain way, I like the Supreme Court stacked a certain way. Speaking personally, I like it stacked a certain way for certain issues. I don't like it stacked a certain way for other issues. I'm a big First Amendment advocate. I'm a big separation of church and state advocate. I think at the end of the day, with our country becoming more non-religious amongst our native population, we are going to see more court rulings that uphold our separation between religion and government. We'll have challenges as well in the future to that, but that'll mostly be from Muslims and not Christians, actually. TBD 50 years from now. Tune into the next episode. It's quite disappointing to see a sitting governor in this country state the remarks that he did. I appreciate Fox News for actually pushing back. I've actually started to Fox News 10 years ago when it came to some of these issues was so dogmatic. It's still kind of dogmatic on the issue every now and then, but I got to give credit to Fox. They've been gradually improving. But to be honest too, this is where I'll actually be very conservative in my argumentation here. It is kind of a weak argument. Well, what about somebody else who has their views? The governor could have rightly struck back and said, okay, who cares about appeasing everybody and their views? And I actually shared the same view. I actually don't like the secular case that, now we get to put up our monument. We get to put up our statue. The only reason we are doing that on our end is because the Christians are doing it on their end. How about we just don't waste anybody's time? We don't waste taxpayers' time. We don't waste families' time. And we don't have monuments. We don't have scenes and displays and protests and cartoonish things here and there, Baphomet statues with a kid on it. We don't have any of that stuff. And we allow our houses of government to be filled with adults who are going to enact policies and run the country that benefits all of you and the people you know and love.
Well, and Thomas, to hammer home on that as well, that's literally what the founding fathers wanted. Notice they did not put statues of Jesus everywhere, right? I mean, this was left for private churches to decide that they wanted to put. And notice that people weren't going in and ripping down statues of Jesus when they were ripping down all the statues. It was Confederate soldiers in public parks, and that was part of the problem. Is that these were public monuments, and I don't want to get into that whole debate about whether or not we should be tearing those down. But
that's a fun debate. I love that debate.
James, maybe you can bring up
I think Jason, I would love that one too.
No, we're running out of time. But James, could you bring up the visual, because this was actually the video we showed out of Key, and I won't bother to replay it again. But it goes right to the point that what you were saying, Thomas, about the idea that you open the door when you say, "Hey, if we get to put in this one, and if you listen to what the governor said, they'll just have to go to the legislature." So really, now we want every group to go to the legislature and put in whatever statue they want everywhere. And this was in Iowa, where they put this satanic statue. And it was kind of interesting when they get to the end of the news piece, they talked about, hey, look, we don't actually believe in Satan. We just know that this really pisses these people off. So I thought that was kind of funny. But anyway, I did want to mention that. And then there was, it was one other quick thing. And it was another thing happened right around the time that they were doing this 10 Commandments thing. They also enacted school choice, and that's the liberty way to approach this. You know, if you want to choose a church that has the 10 Commandments in it, that's the way we should be doing it. You choose your own school, you choose your own church, and whatever they want to do, that's the way it should be. And unfortunately, they're promoting school choice while at the same time promoting authoritarianism.
Yep. That's why AFL is bipartisan. That's why we'll have libertarian friends and allies and conservative friends and allies and liberal friends and allies. We're going to make enemies on all ends of the political spectrum because we're going to remain consistent in that regard. And then when it comes to Iowa and Des Moines, I was just in Des Moines around a week before that ended up happening. And when we started tweeting about it, that became our most popular Twitter session of all of 2023. One of our most popular ever in our near 5-year history at that point, just because of how we kind of monopolized on the social media time on that and did it brilliantly. But they're all wrong. They're hypocrites. They're all wrong on it. And a lot of these people, they know they're wrong on it, but they're doing this and saying this to politically appease their donors, to appease, by the way, a base of voters who would still vote for them anyways, by the way. You know, if I'm a conservative, if I'm a Republican, and I actually, privately speaking, not as president of Atheists for Liberty, by the way, as just an individual, I'm a Republican. As of August 12, 2024, I still am on paper a Republican committee person, by the way. Okay? This idea that suburban Jackie or Bob is not going to vote Republican in Louisiana just because, I actually stood for the Constitution and did not want a stupid statue on government land that wasted all of your time. The idea that they're going to vote Democrat in 2024, when wokeism is everywhere, when you have Kamala Harris as the nominee, by the way. And again, I'm not trying to even state Kamala. I'm saying if I'm a Republican and I'm stating this from a Republican perspective, they're not going to vote Kamala Harris in November of 2024. So this is what I try to tell people when we're at Freedom Fest, when we're at CPAC, and when we're at these places. It is such a low bar to actually stand for the Constitution and to not play this politically correct religion game that we've been having to play for some stupid reason for 30 years. Why? All the demographics are against you. The Constitution is against you. I'm not some intellectual liberal coming on in stating something that's like out of left field. This is just basic stuff that all people, all Americans, the American people of all religious faiths and none, can and should appreciate.
Well, I think this is a good segue to wrap up the show. And usually we do that by going to our Knucklehead Noise Patrol. And it's funny that you mentioned Kamala Harris and our choices coming up in 2024, because that's what we have for our Knucklehead Noise Patrol quote. And this is a quote that Kamala had dredged up, or that they dredged up from 2017. And Jane, maybe you could bring up the visual real quick. Jane is our invisible hand, by the way, for those of you who are new to the show. And here it was. Kamala says everybody needs to be more woke. And so we have a little bit of video on that. James, can you play KNP1?
And, we have to stay woke. Like, everybody needs to be woke. And you can talk about if you're the wokest or woker, but just stay more woke than less woke.
Isn't it funny how they're trying to not look extreme? We're the sane party. We're the unity party. And by the way, again, this is me personally talking. We have plenty of Democrats who don't like Donald Trump, who will vote against him in November. I could care less, actually. This is such a low bar of me talking. I'm speaking personally. But, talk about shooting yourself in the foot. Oh, my God. No, I have a great record of putting criminals behind bars, and I'm the sane person, and we're not politically extreme like Donald Trump and the cult of MAGA. Look at me. I put this big middle-aged white guy as my VP. Look at how unity I am of getting all these factory workers in, to vote. Literally. This is the exact problem. So this is why I personally tell people the Democratic Party is becoming more and more and more and more and more woke. And when people say Thomas, this is just your right-wing bias showing or whatever, that was 2017. Guys, that was 2017. That's 7 years later with critical race theory, with intersectionality, with gender insanity, with all this stuff, completely ripping away the careers of fairly liberal-minded intellectual scientists. That's not right-wing MAGAism. So when you see Kamala Harris saying that's a big problem. And for any of the I just, this is my personal view. Okay. For any of the anti-woke Democrats that think Donald Trump is such a big threat to democracy, and I'm not even telling for you to vote for Donald Trump. If you want to vote Kennedy. If you want to vote Chase Oliver, vote Chase Oliver. If you want to not vote at all for the presidency, don't vote for the presidency at all. Whatever. But you have to understand, for people who wonder why a lot of classical liberal types decided to vote Republican in 2020, decided to vote for Donald Trump in 2020 and are going to vote for Donald Trump in 2024. Why did James Lindsay, for instance, become this guy? Why is Colin Wright hanging out with conservatives so often? There's a reason why this is happening. And if you guys are really trying to look like, no, we're the sane people, we're trying to pull the party back to like pre-2016, pre-social justice, you got to try harder. You got to try harder because this kind of stuff is just more and more proof that gets a lot of normal middle of the ground people, those kind of science advocates that were in that barrier at Stony Brook, to see the wokeism get crazier and crazier on their campus to where they're like, oh boy, this is nuts. I might join the college Republican chapter and like see if these guys are actually not crazy like the DSA people calling everything racist and sexist. That's what I did too. I went to college. I saw that the only people that weren't spewing social justice were the Republicans. I was a non-woke Democrat. And I went to school up in Albany, New York. And I quickly saw, due to certain policies with wokeism being enacted everywhere and with free speech under attack on campus, I quickly joined the college Republicans and even eventually called myself one because they were like the normal Democrats of the 90s. They were the normal people. And by the way, I'm not telling anybody here to vote Republican. You guys might be LP people. You get my point as to what I'm saying. Not to sound like I'm from 2019 and 2020 again, but man, that gets my gears grinding there because it really shows you that just reality itself is under attack from these people. Yeah. And it's why, even amongst fellow atheists, we get attacked by these people who have embraced a new religion, and it is wokeism. Yeah. And as much as we're going to try to not look so anti-woke only all the time, and we are going to be the fiery atheists that we need to be about religion, I'm kind of glad that we premiered at CPAC. I'm kind of glad that we premiered as the anti-woke atheist to show fellow atheists you're not alone in thinking that Kamala quote was crazy.
Yeah, it sounds very much like cult speak is what she sounds like there. Yeah. But yeah, go ahead, Leon.
I just can't believe that she's the alternative to Donald Trump. This woman is just a cackling fool. That's all she is. Yeah. But that's just me. She's certainly not going to get my vote. That's for sure.
Well, I think we've pretty much wrapped up the show, and I wanted to give you a chance real quick to, do you have any last words for the audience, Thomas, or anything? Bring up your web pages real quick. James, can you bring up the Atheists for Liberty page? Oh, there we go. And here is, that's atheistforliberty.org. Here we have the link tree for Atheists for Liberty, and there you
it's got everything on there.
Yeah. And of course they have a YouTube page as well. And like I said, I've watched a couple of them and they're pretty good. So definitely you should check those out. Anything you wanted to let people know?
Yeah. So thank you all so much for tuning in. Thank you guys for having me. So I'll do a little bit of a plug. I'm the president of an organization called Atheists for Liberty, atheistforliberty.org, like was shown there, atheistsforliberty.org. Sign up and become a member today. We're a 501c3 org. All contributions are tax deductible. We need people in the movement. We're having state directors host events in a city near you. We do activism and community engagement in person. We do Discord events for private people who want to be in a space online where they feel like they can have a sense of community and purpose and belonging. So we do game nights, trivia nights, special events with famous atheists in server. We do X spaces that are growing. And if you're a member, we can make you a speaker with plenty of famous atheists who come on in. You'll also be able to then grow your profile as a result of that. There's 3 different shows on the Atheists for Liberty YouTube channel. So I'm going live tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. On my show, we're going to be having Edward Hudgens. He's going to be our guest. He's also very frequent in the Freedom Fest Liberty space, but I have a show every single Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. We have a philosophy show, a very libertarian-minded philosophy show that is called Airs of Fire. That's on our channel. Atheist Insights is another show. We have so much content and so many things to do online and offline. If you want to volunteer, go to atheistforliberty.org, click the Get Involved volunteer section. Fall internships are also going to be coming out soon. So soon we're going to update the website. If you need credit and you're a college student, you need credits or whatever, we got you. Okay, so we need everybody everybody involved in this fight. Not only do we need people's time, we need people's money, we need people joining in from all sorts of different perspectives around this country to fight for free speech, free thinking, and freedom for all. And all of you can follow me as well, not only Atheists for Liberty on all social media platforms, but you can follow me as well at Sheedy Tom. That's SheedyThom. Guys, appreciate it. That's my end of my little spiel. And again, thank you for having me.
Tom, one thing I did want to ask you real quick, you mentioned about the organization and how people can join. Just suppose you're somebody who's just, I guess, a little skeptical about religion and they wanted to check you guys out. Is it a friendly place for people
It is.
who haven't said, hey, I'm an atheist or something? You know?
We have people who say they're just non-religious. We have people who call themselves agnostics. We even have some Christians and Jews who just like the online programming and the game nights and the events and the community that we have. And they've joined the Discord. They've gone to the in-person meetups in cities near them around the country. We're going to be at 50 state directors by the end of the year as well. So there will be in every state from Wyoming to Alaska to South Carolina, a state director near you. So we are growing a movement that actually cares about you, that actually cares about normalizing atheism, that isn't going to be partisan and play woke games. We're not going to be pro-Democrat. We're not going to be pro-libertarian. We're not going to be pro-conservative. We are going to be an enlightenment, values-based atheist organization that wants to normalize atheism, preserve free thinking, safeguard secularism, and advance individual liberty. And we've had a good, solid record of doing that for the past 5 years. And we want you in the fight. So go to atheistsliberty.org, sign up, $12 a year, guys. And if you want to give us a donation as well, that's tax deductible. We want you in the fight. Volunteer your time or volunteer your money and join the movement today.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Thomas. And if you're out there watching us and you just saw Thomas here for Atheists for Liberty, you saw, you've seen people who are going out there and demonstrating in front of their city councils, who are running for office. Think about what you can do in your community, because as Thomas said, we need everybody in the fight. So think about how you can make your community a little more liberty oriented. So thanks so much for watching us. Until next time, stay tuned and stay free.
Oh, yes, indeed. Thomas. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, always and forever.
Thank you for listening to the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast. Find us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, your favorite podcast network, and at knuckleheadsofliberty.com.